The Radio Today programme with Broadcast Bionics. Innovative solutions for creative radio people.
Thanks for choosing the weekly podcast from Radio Today. Hello, I'm Stuart Clarkson. Our founder and editor, Roy Martin, is here as well. Hello, Roy.
Hi, Stu. Here we are, another week of radio stuff.
And joining us on the podcast as well this week, Martin Campbell, former Chief Advisor of Radio at Ofcom. Welcome to the Radio Today programme. It's good to have you back, Martin.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
And it's what, a couple of years actually since I think you were last on this podcast talking to Trevor. Just as that consultation from the DCMS was starting. Now, we've not had any of the legislation as a result of that, but some big changes from Ofcom to move us towards what they were hoping to introduce. And it's a lot has changed actually in those 2 years, even though we haven't got the legislation.
It has, yeah, that's right. Yes, 2 years since I was last on. It must have been good last time to be asked back so quickly. I do find it quite interesting that we're now at the stage. I mean, I do feel, this is probably why you've got me on, a bit like an old dinosaur, because I started off in local newspapers and they've all but disappeared, and then moved on to local commercial radio, and now that has effectively all but disappeared. And it's disappeared, I think, because it is unsustainable. But it's been allowed to become unsustainable. I think that's the shame of it. It's more of a sort of death of a thousand cuts rather than a plan to get where we are today with it. And that I do think is a shame. But I think we've got there. You mentioned legislation, and I think the fact that the government has been so busy, it needed legislation to change commercial radio in one fell swoop, and that could have been done, but they couldn't get the legislation through. So there's been this ridiculous game of pretend over the last few years that localness is being done and it's being catered for, and we really know it isn't. And I think what Ofcom probably forgot were the two big rules that I think actually dictate regulation. One is you don't get it if you don't regulate for it, and that's certainly true with localness, and once it's gone it never comes back, and that's true with localness, and that's sort of where we are today. It's inevitable, but I think it's unsustainable in its old glory times. I see one or two blogs and web comments of people harking back to the days of BRMB and Trent and so on, but what are you laughing at? They have gone. They have gone. The audiences are different, and I think it's now interesting that the industry have effectively got what it wanted. And now it's here. I worry that it's a bit like dog chasing Van, that it won't know what to do, because I don't know what the battleground is now for breakfast shows. Do you?
No, we'll come on to that and what the groups might do with the changes in rules. But just to kind of take it back, how have we got here? Is it the groups lobbying for these changes, and should Ofcom have been a bit firmer and said, no, we're not going to do that?
Yes, absolutely. I think Ofcom, when it came into being, it wanted to be a shiny Blairite type of regulator with great open views and so on. And there was a great deal of misunderstanding about why radio was regulated, I think, in Ofcom, which is one of the differences that we had. And people would say, well, why is it being regulated? People are doing things on the internet. Why don't you let them do what they want to do? And that prevailed, but it prevailed bit by bit to the point where I think a lot of people have sort of fallen away from commercial radio because they're not quite sure what it is anymore. Well, we now know what it is. It's now, two or three great big networks.
And in terms of the groups getting their own way with Ofcom, we've already seen that because they brought out a consultation on changes to local approved areas, and then Global went, well, we don't like those, so for our stations, can we change our approved areas? And it seems they're going to say yes to that. Yes,
I think they will. I think Ofcom's view is let the industry get on with it, but they have been hamstrung by the legislation because the legislation doesn't say radio stations can get on with it. So it's been a bit of a mishmash. But the industry has always said things like, if we're not local, we're not anything. And then proceeded to dump as much localness as they possibly can. And now they are at the situation where, well, if they're not local, what are they? And so I think they've got a big challenge on their hands, I must say, because particularly as far as music is concerned. Because if you look at something like LBC, I think it's interesting that the BBC and particularly Radio 4's obsession with gender issues and soft news and arts news and so on has left a massive gap that LBC have very cleverly walked into and started to fill, and I think that's shaken up the BBC. There doesn't appear to be that sort of gap to go for in music.
Just looking at your article, Martin, from a couple of years ago, Radio Today opinion piece, you say once all this happens, commercial radio, like you've just said, will probably desert the over 50s and the BBC will be expected to pick up the pieces. Now, this was a couple of years ago and it seems to be a hot topic at the moment. So what do you think of the BBC locals taking over that gap?
Well, yes, I mean, I think it's inevitable. I mean, I have had a look round at some of the commercial radio websites, and there is a little bit of news in there. But to be honest, if you need a reason to listen to a station, and the more that the independents go down this route, and as I say, that they've now sort of reached the end point, and I'm not sure they know what to do now they're there, but the BBC stations, I think, probably will come into their own, and they will give local news. I mean, you don't turn on your local commercial radio to get local news, and you need it from, you do need it from somewhere. And I don't believe that everyone will just say, oh, well, I get my news from Twitter and so on. There will be a lot of people who want some sort of, and I use the word advisedly, regulated news, some sort of proper news, and that is being left to the BBC. And so, I think there will now be a battle, just as there was a look at whether Radio 5 is doing too much sport and not enough news. I think now the independents will want Ofcom to take a look at the BBC and say, well, they should go over and fill these gaps that aren't so commercially enticing and let us get to the money.
And on the local news on commercial radio, Ofcom would surely say, well, we've agreed to let them share programmes and share DJs across big areas in return for continuing to supply local news. But I'm presuming the regulation of that is going to be pretty much non-existent, and it'll be up to competitors to say, well, that station there isn't doing what it's supposed to do in terms of local news. And if there aren't as many competitors in the local market because of the consolidation, there's not going to be anybody to report them.
That's a very astute observation. Yes, absolutely right. I mean, the complaints about the lack of news inevitably over the years have always come from competitors rather than listeners. Listeners will vote with their ears. You're right. The complaints have always come from competitors. And if you're only going to have, say, 3 people left in the marketplace, and certainly as far as local is concerned, maybe 2, they're not. I doubt they'll complain about each other, because it will open up cans of worms for both of them. So yes, I think they'll be allowed to go down their own way. I thought, as someone who drafted the original localness guidelines years ago, I thought it was quite funny now to see that an enhanced news service is one that has at least one fully formed local news story. I think that tells you all you need to know about how much emphasis there's going to be on local news.
I mean, we're complaining about it, but what could anybody actually do? Because Ofcom has made these decisions. When the legislation happens, it will kind of reinforce that. So, as you say, it's a one-way street and there's no turning back.
No, absolutely not. No,
so there's no point in us complaining then, really.
Well, no, there isn't. No, there isn't. I mean, all what you see is the result of this endless lobbying that effectively says, don't worry, we'll look after it, because if we're not providing what people want to listen to, then they won't listen to us, and we'll go out of business. So you can leave everything to us. Which is an argument used in lots of different industries, and it's a bit iffy, to say the least.
I think when you were on with Trevor a couple of years ago, you said the local DJ will soon become an endangered species. That's looking ever more likely with the consolidation that we've seen, but presumably Ofcom isn't bothered about that.
Go on, quite a prophet, aren't I? I'm good.
We'll come back to this one in 2 years and see what you said today was correct.
Yeah. No. I think that is right. No, it's not. It's not for Ofcom to worry about the existence of local DJs. No, absolutely not.
But do you think the government will be bothered that it's an industry where people are losing jobs if we're going to see a lot of redundancies as a result of more programme sharing?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because I don't think in the great scheme of things, I mean, the numbers will be horrific for families and people, but, in industry numbers, it's not phenomenal. And whilst they have moved, looking at the number of redundancies in local newspapers, of course the government have moved and said, where are people going to get news from? I think that's more a sort of self-serving thing, because they're wondering where government press releases are going to finish up. If there is absolutely no local newspapers at all. So I think, it would be ironic if the government had to step in and stop something that they've allowed over the years. So that is quite bizarre.
Martin, as far as the DJs are concerned, we're quite used to having 17 hours a day from London on commercial radio. We're expecting news from Global, certainly, of a national breakfast show any day now on at least one of the networks. Do you think that will work? Do you think people will tune out because it's not from up the road at breakfast time?
I think we're sort of past that stage of saying, well, if it's not up, if it doesn't come from up the road, then I'm not going to listen to it. I think it's gone wider than that. But what I want to know is, why would people want to listen to it at all? Because the thing is that whilst there is this sort of resurgence in speech, which I find quite interesting, music doesn't unite young people, and they're the ones that are going to spend on the people who advertise. I think that's all quite wrong, because I think actually the whole commercial selling has been a bit skewed. It's all about the young, and music doesn't unite young people at breakfast, since its availability changed anymore. So I'm wondering what the delivery is, what the battleground is for this, because we've gone past the days of a Terry Wogan uniting a great slab of the country because people like to listen to him. Listening has changed so much since then. So I don't know what they're going to offer, really.
And as somebody who was on the inside, here's a question for you. Do we need Ofcom anymore? Is there any point? I can't remember the last time they said no to something that a station asked for. Not
for radio, I don't think, really. I think you probably need a regulator for taste and decency, or harm and offence, as they call it now, maybe. But, harm and offence is an industry on its own, isn't it, these days? No, I don't think so. What Ofcom do tend to do, and I've always found this a little bit strange, is that, we're sort of agreeing that local broadcasting and local breakfast shows are too expensive to do properly, so they're being left to the stations that haven't got any money at all, which is the community stations. And the community stations have a lot more regulation to put up with than the commercial stations, and it all seems a bit upside down and topsy-turvy to me. I've never quite understood that.
Yeah, and they're being allowed extra power, increase their areas and the coverage that they're getting, but as you say, the content and their key commitments are still quite tightly regulated. So I guess they need to see what commercial radio has got out of Ofcom and be a bit more powerful as a group to come to the regulator and say, well, we want some of this, please.
Well, they have, and I know people who. Sorry, I don't wish to patronise community radio, but I know people in the business who sort of feel very sorry for community radio and have tried to unite them, to get a voice, to bang on Ofcom's door and say, look, this is getting a little bit ridiculous now, because the money is talking and we haven't got any money. But it's never happened. I don't know whether it's not possible to bring them all together for one voice? I suppose it would be a bit like juggling with soot, I suppose.
I think the last time we had you on as well, the BBC was about to take over, Ofcom was about to take over responsibility for the BBC from the BBC Trust.
Yes, that's gone awfully well. Yeah.
Looking at, how do you think it's gone? And should Ofcom now be looking at the service licences for those radio stations? You talked about the University of Kent report saying that 5 Live's not meeting its news and current affairs requirements in their view. So should Ofcom, once they've got this commercial radio stuff out of the way, redraw some of the service licences for BBC Radio?
Yes, I think they should. I mean, I've never been particularly enamoured of the wording of the service licences. I know when they were first brought out, I kicked up quite a lot because there were so many phrases that just didn't smack of regulation, like strive to and hope to and all this sort of nonsense. But now they've allowed the commercial radio industry to effectively divest themselves of all sensible regulation. You have to look closely at the BBC and commercial together in the round to make sure that you are delivering. I mean, the only point of having any regulation is to make sure that people are well served all round. And I don't think they are. I think it's a great section of people who are not particularly well served in radio. So, I think Ofcom do need to be quite stern with the BBC. Whether it's Radio 2 or 5 Live or 4, and actually be a regulator to stand up and be counted and shake the BBC about a bit, because I worry that it's not happening.
So, back at commercial radio, what do you think is next? We've just had a massive couple of weeks with Bauer making a few purchases. More consolidation still to come, do you think?
Well, is there any left? I mean, there's there's UKRD and Nation, isn't there? But I mean, it's interesting that it's fallen effectively now into two camps. I didn't see the wireless thing coming at all. I mean, I keep my ear reasonably close to the ground. I don't listen to a lot of commercial radio these days. It's a funny phrase I hear quite a lot. But getting hold of, what did they buy? Wireless? Celador and Lynx, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a hell of a group, doesn't it? It's not quite as big as Global now, is it? But virtually there. And there we are left with sort of wireless on the national scale. But everyone now is a national broadcaster. But that's the way, obviously, that it goes with the internet and DAB and so on. Everyone is a national broadcaster, aren't they?
Well, it would appear so, because you can get anything anywhere. While we've got you on as well, of course, you were the managing editor at Talk Radio back in its original guise. Speech radio having even more of a resurgence. We talked about LBC earlier, and News UK now on the scene, obviously running Talk Radio.
Yes.
What do you think of Mr. Murdoch's involvement in the UK radio scene?
Yeah, it's a bit sort of backseaty, isn't it? It's strange. As soon as the word Murdoch crops up, everyone gets very worried. I mean, I think what they're doing on Talk is very good. I don't know whether there's anything in this changing from Talk Radio to Talk News. Was that mooted
that was Chris Evans' rumour, yes.
Right, yeah, that is interesting, because I think that is a good that is a good battlefield, and I think LBC are doing well there. I don't know. I mean, Murdoch's always sort of been around, with the days of Kelvin and so on at Talk. He's always hung around. I don't think it's a. Are you suggesting I should say it's a malign influence?
No, not at all. I think it's been a good thing. We've seen a lot of investment, and certainly what they've spent on Chris Evans and what they've done with Virgin and Talk, bringing in people like Eamon Holmes and Jeremy Kyle and Matthew Wright. They're spending money, which traditionally
Absolutely.
a lot of commercial radio hasn't done.
Yeah, no, very much so. As indeed have LBC. So yeah, from that point of view, it is good. But as I say, I'll hack back. It is clear what the battleground is there, and sooner or later there will be a winner. But as for the rest, I think it's just sort of fragmenting into into not very much, really.
Yeah, a prophecy from Martin from 2 years ago. You said we'll finish up with some big groups and one or two local stations that the big group are not interested in.
Yeah.
So you're about right there.
Yeah.
We will revisit what you've said in 2 years' time and see if any of it has come
kind.
true. But thank you for coming on. It's good to catch up with you as well, Martin.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Martin.